This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Trinity Cyber and W2 Communications. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, every employee gets a voice at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Government-wide cyber deadlines are coming closer. Solving the generative AI puzzle at the Pentagon. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. The Department of Veterans Affairs is reviewing results from its annual all-employee survey. Leaders at VA will use the data the agency collects from the survey to help them make decisions about employee experience. Jason Thomas is Chief of Staff for the Veterans Experience Office at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Jason, welcome. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming on the program today. What's the gist of the AES, and how does it compare to the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey that every agency does?
Yeah, of course. Well, VA has been using the AES survey, our own survey, since about 2003, but from about 2013 to 2018, we were using both surveys. What we found to be was combining the Federal Employee View survey with our AES allows us to have additional capabilities that we couldn't get from the other survey. Mm-hmm. Specifically, what we can do is we have our survey results mapped out to about 294 sub-organizations. So we can drill in to each at the sub-organizational level and see what those trends, topics, themes, gaps and opportunities, frankly, are for our employees.
What are some of those in the 2023 numbers?
We saw a couple of interesting trends for 2023. Number one was it was actually our highest response rate we've ever had in the history of VA. We had a 75% response rate, and if you think about the size of the department, the second largest in government, that's a huge amount of data flowing into us. What we also saw that was interesting is we went up 3 points in best place to work, which is always great, at 72. And then we also saw 40% of our workforce say that they were highly engaged on the job, which for me personally, being the Chief of Staff of the Veterans Experience Office, highly engaged employees also tend to provide better customer service. Mm-hmm. So that's always a great thing to see. It's very symbiotic. And then the last thing that we saw that was also surprising was actually reports of burnout had lessened over the year. So I found that really interesting.
What do you think is driving the reports of burnout? Because that's one that not just in VA, but medical professionals across the country over the last 4 or 5 years have been reporting really high levels of burnout.
I found it interesting too, because it's a little bit to me counterintuitive because we're just rolling out of a major health crisis. We're just had the legislation, the CAPT legislation, which actually expands benefits and services to eligible veterans, which obviously would create more of a workload. But what I think that I have to give credit to our senior leadership at VA, they were very intentional about recruiting and deepening the bench. So I think that they're actually laying out work in more equitable manners all the way across the board.
Highly engaged workforce is another thing that I'm sure your counterparts at other agencies are envious about. What do you think is driving that?
I think we arguably have the best mission in government, personally.
You're forgiven for being biased.
Right, I am biased, I admit that. But I think really just by being able to perform, delivering benefits and services to veterans, families, caregivers, and survivors, it almost, it's a very important mission. And I think people rally around that. And then plus, VA and the leadership are very intentional about the investment in employees. So we're providing them tools. We're providing them professional development opportunities to make their jobs more effective and better.
Human capital pros across government tell me, about the feds at least, that the higher the response rate is, the more the indication is that they think that employees think their opinions matter.
Yes.
What do you do inside VA to convey that to your employees? Hey, if you respond to this and you tell us things, we're going to do something about it.
I think there's a couple of things that are going on. I believe that, number one, that the investment of the leadership, actually talking to employees and saying their voice matters and asking for their input and opinions, that's very helpful, number one, from the top down. I think the other thing is over time, employees actually see us do something with the data, right? A survey at rest does no one any good. But if we can, the trick is operationalizing into tangible programs or tools that we can provide employees to make them more effective.
And I imagine there's a little bit of a marketing point there too, where not only do you do something with the data, but you let them know you've done something with the data.
Absolutely, the feedback loop. And it kind of engenders more responses too. When people see the needle move, they want to participate more.
What do you think in somebody at another agency that may be laid out differently than VA, smaller, not configured the same way with the high concentration of healthcare providers and all of that, can learn from what you're doing with the AES, whether it's how they're applying their pulse surveys, how they're applying their Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey numbers, or whatever?
I think it starts with a commitment from leadership, number one, driven from the top down, being committed to improving the employee experience. I think the second thing would be showing, once again, that feedback loop, producing tangible outcomes for employees based upon their input. That's the second thing. And then the third is, have leadership reward organizations that have improved based upon their surveys, and at the same time, not to use it as a punishment. Bad news is actually an opportunity to get better, and you have to view it in that lens.
Commitment from leadership is something people talk about a lot in government. What steps do you see at VA that indicate to you and that you think go down the chain to indicate to people, yeah, this means something to the people at the top?
I think it's almost a daily demonstration of the employee being, central to our ability to deliver good customer experience and good customer service. And I think the senior leadership at VA has fully embraced the notion that you can't deliver good customer experience without also having a good employee experience, because that engenders, the extra effort, right, on behalf of the customers you serve.
We talked a little bit before we went on the air about the work that you do long term, not just during the survey, on the employee experience inside the VEO. What's the kind of the nexus between this all-employee survey, the numbers that you get out of the FEVs, and the work that you do on an ongoing basis with the employee journey maps and those kinds of things?
Yeah, I kind of consider the AES is you go to the doctor on a yearly for your physical, and it kind of sets the tone for your next fiscal year of things you might want to do. And then the Veterans Experience Office also fields what we call a quarterly employee trust report, which that is kind of taking the vitals as you go every quarter to see if maybe new programs are actually working or if there are other things that are coming up on the horizon. And I think both of those put together, not only just the annual report, but then checking in with your workforce over time is a really good way to adjust your plan as you move forward.
Based on all of that data that you collect then, what are you looking at for 2024? What are the priorities that you're setting that where you want to see the needle move when you look at this next year?
I think it's going to be an interesting next year because, just to be honest, the changes in telework posture and policy, we're bringing people back to the office. I think it's vitally important that we have office space to collaborate and meet and share experiences and develop, co-design plans that help the agency. But at the same time, we're going to have to be very intentional about how we do that, because we have to have offerings within the workspace that differentiate from Teams meetings and Zoom meetings that people can do at home for 8 hours a day. And we have to strike that balance with offering that in-office context that you can't get at home, but at the same time provide stuff for the employees that say, okay, this is worth coming in because we're actually doing good things.
To what degree, if at all, do you try to anticipate what those things will be? Not to rig the scores, but just to anticipate what the employee will want and to make that experience for that employee as good as possible.
Well, I think you can see a little bit out of certain AES results based on your organization as you drill into it. I mean, it's the job of the leadership to continue to talk to their employees and tease out those things, what they desire to see in the office, whether it be, open collaborative space or better technology or just better tools for them to do their job more effectively. It's leadership's job to actually have those discussions and then try to operationalize it for the employee.
Quick final thought. You talked about some of the numbers that jumped out at you. Is there anything that was a big wow where you and your colleagues said we didn't expect that, either to the good or the bad?
I think for me is honestly the response rate. When you have that many people investing their time and effort to try to help guide the organization, it's a pretty powerful statement.
Kevin, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much for joining me.
Very welcome.
You can read more about the All-Employee Survey on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, some government-wide cyber deadlines are coming closer. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Here's Bill Rowan from Splunk on Innovation in Government, FedRAMP, presented by Carasoft.
I get the concern, but I think that if you're going to do business in the federal government, or for that matter, the state government arena, I think it's fair to say we're going to demand very high standards. And if your intellectual property is not up to that standard, do we really want to have it in areas where we might be talking about information around the Department of Energy, information around DoD, law enforcement data? These are all very important issues.
To learn more, go to fedgovtoday.com/FedRAMP. Welcome back. Some important cyber anniversaries are happening this time of year. The National Cybersecurity Strategy just celebrated its 6-month anniversary, and the Federal Zero Trust Strategy will turn 2 years old this coming January. Steve Ryan is founder and CEO of Trinity Cyber. Steve, welcome. It's great to talk to you. What are some of the big cyber challenges that agencies are having?
I think the biggest challenge that the agencies have today is that the cybersecurity ecosystem is largely optimized to support incident response. And by that I mean responding to things that have already happened. So as a result, the security teams are flooded with alerts. You've got disparate systems all over the place. It's expensive to run, so there's a cost issue. But the primary thing is that they're buried in alerts. And then so many of these alerts contain false positives, right? So that, maybe 30% of them are false positives. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes an intractable problem, and a problem where typically, agencies are trying to scale to the problem, perhaps with more people. And the problem itself can't scale with people, mm-hmm. right? It requires a different approach.
Cyber ecosystem oriented to response as opposed to defense, or as opposed to some other situation, or?
Yeah, as opposed to preventing it from happening in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so many of these systems are reporting about an incident that has already happened. And so there's an entire body of effort aimed at looking at all those alerts, reducing them down to something that's manageable, and then responding to each of those incidents. Mm-hmm. And what they could be doing is turning around and focusing on the threats themselves and even the adversaries that are going after them.
The consensus seems to be, though, that perimeter defense is not the solution anymore. Nobody believes that. What fixes that? What makes the lives of those cyber pros easier than what you're describing?
I'd say the edge is not dead, and that's a really important thing. In between the bad guy and you, there's a network that connects you. I mean, that's the common denominator. Right? For a cyber threat to be a cyber threat, a bad guy has to get to you through a network. And so there are natural places where networks converge and then they distribute mm-hmm. Into the endpoints. And so if you think about being a defender and think about all the networks that are under your purview, and then all the endpoints, all the devices that are inside those networks, and then think about all the incidents that are occurring on each of those endpoints, you can't possibly scale to that problem. But if you turned around and you said, there's some number of bad guys, and each of those bad guys have some number of tools, it's a much smaller number, mm-hmm. right? And then find the use of those tools in the networks before they become incidents, right? And there's a point in the topology, and every network's a little different, but there's a point in the topology where that makes sense. And you might not call it a perimeter, you might call it an edge, you might call it something else, but it's something in the network that can be done.
I mentioned the National Cybersecurity Strategy. Is there a role for policymakers, people who write things like that in this, or is this a technical thing that the boots on the ground folks that are working on these networks on an ongoing basis will need to do, or is it some combination?
It's a bit of both. Yeah, it's a bit of both. The strategy is the National Cyber Strategy is really kind of heading in the right direction, right? We're kind of coalescing efforts towards making some of this stuff stop. CISA publishes the known exploited vulnerabilities list, known as the KEV list, and so the idea is, here are the vulnerabilities that are currently being exploited today, and so again, the natural way to think about this is, well, shoot, I've got to patch all my systems, and that's going to take forever and a lot of money and a lot of time. And I'm not suggesting that you don't do that, but what I am suggesting is a bad guy exploiting one of those vulnerabilities is one thing. It could be going after 10,000 machines, but that's one thing. And looking for that one thing and doing something about it then and there, not responding to the incident, is really going to help.
Steve, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming on the program today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You can find links to the cyber documents I mentioned at the beginning of that conversation on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, solving the generative AI puzzle at the Pentagon. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. A new task force is working on the generative AI challenge inside the Defense Department. Task Force Lima is part of the Chief Data and Artificial Intelligence Office at the Pentagon. Captain Xavier Lugo, U.S. Navy's mission commander of Task Force Lima. Captain, welcome. It's great to have you on the program. What is the mission of Task Force Lima, sir?
Well, thank you very much for having me. The main mission of the task force is to facilitate and accelerate the implementation of generative AI across the whole Department of Defense.
Facilitate means expand it, make it easier to use?
It's understanding it, first of all, and learning how to implement it in current workflows that we have at the Department of Defense.
How does that fit into the broader portfolio of the CDAO office?
So it's a natural fit. So the CDAO is the main PSA involved in artificial intelligence for the department, and we fall under the Directorate of Algorithmic Warfare, which is implementing software solutions, analytics, and of course AI into the missions of the military.
Now, what does the Algorithmic Warfare Directorate do? A piece of that, as you mentioned.
So the Algorithmic Warfare Directorate, again, is building infrastructure for the whole department. It's also looking into what are the use cases that should be utilized or where artificial intelligence can be implemented in. That's the main one of our main goals. It's also looking at other ways for the warfighter to gain decision advantage via analytics and exposure of data at the enterprise level.
It's tempting for people like me to think about AI at the very, very edge of the warfighter experience. Are you looking just there, or are you looking all throughout the workflows of the Department of Defense?
So through all the echelons. So artificial intelligence can be applied in every single echelon of the Department of Defense. You're correct. At the edge is where more of the, what I would say, fascinating use cases come to mind. However, strategically, and specifically like at the combatant commands and at other type of strategic levels, we are looking at how to speed up that decision-making process, but always responsibly and with humans in the loop.
I want to come back to that responsible AI question in a few moments, but it strikes me then the challenge becomes, how do you think about the decisions that one makes across the department in every piece of the fabric, rather than just let's find something that we can apply artificial intelligence to? Am I thinking about it the right way?
You are. So first of all, artificial intelligence per se and the utilization of data is not new to the Department of Defense. So we have several decades of experience on it. What is new is really the speed of compute. And of course, generative AI does add a couple of other angles to artificial intelligence and vectors that we need to explore. But the real challenge for us is to expose the amount of data that we have to these models, and to ensure that the data provides accurate type of decision making.
You hit on something there that I think is important, and that is that generative AI is maybe not different than artificial intelligence, but the next progression of artificial intelligence. How does that progression or evolution manifest itself in the work that you're doing, Captain?
So that's the main mission of Task Force Lima, is to look into generative AI, which, as you said, is a subset of AI. Where it manifests itself is that generative AI is still so new that we have to learn not only how it works, which is the science explains how it works, but it's really what are the risks to it, how do we mitigate against them, and also the technology gaps that it has. Famously hallucinations, right? So how do we get around that? But just because it has those gaps doesn't mean that it's not useful. And that is really our first task, is to find, at the current state of technology, where can we use this?
And what have you found? What are some of the use cases that you're seeing so far?
Yes. So first of all is low-risk missions. Everything from administrative tasks, for example, text generation to break the writer's block that occurs a lot. Also some logistic type of missions, and information summarization. We, as you can imagine, there's a lot of information out there, and that we need to put in context that is simple for the user to understand. So it does a lot of the grunt work of literally finding these documents and summarizing them into synthesis that we need at that moment in time to answer a lot of commanders' questions that are needed to make decisions. So again, every single use case that we are looking at, low risk, human in the loop, and there are no, at this moment we're not looking at anything that has any type of direct kinetic implication.
Understood. You've used the word risk a couple of times.
Yes.
How do you evaluate risk, and how do you determine what risk is manageable and what risk needs to be mitigated before you can move forward?
Correct. And that is, we are in the process of establishing those metrics, right? So risk is, there are many ways to look at risk. And many different lenses to it. At this moment, we're looking more at the risk of, again, from a responsible AI perspective, but also risk to mission, and risk in the sense of if the particular technology is providing less than factual information, what are the consequences of that?
How have you been able to drill down into the whys when you get those kinds of responses that are not, you can tell, okay, we know this isn't right. Are you able to go drill down into that and find out what the root of that is, whether it's the algorithms or the data sets or
so
whatever?
Again, we're in the middle of that. The task force was announced on 10th of August. So a lot of questions around that theme. We are engaging industry a lot to help us determine what are the appropriate mechanisms to determine those types of analysis into the why the technology is actually producing what it is. But at the same token, even without fully understanding what it is, there are processes to mitigate, and those are part of what the use cases that we're receiving from all the areas of the department. They include mitigation and strategies for them.
We just have a couple of minutes left. I said we'd come back to responsible AI. What's the definition of that, either DoD or school of thought, all across the spectrum of artificial intelligence? What does that mean regarding generative AI, Captain?
So for generative AI, responsible AI it applies for all artificial intelligence. And as I said, generative AI is a subset of it. So it's really about the ways to ethically, safety and accountability of that tool. So it's not only on the inputs, but also what actions are taken by the particular technology, again, under the lens of ethics, under the lens of safety, and under the lens of accountability, so that we can trace back to the data and be accountable to hold people accountable for the particular decisions or utilization of the technology.
Captain Lugo, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much, sir.
You can read more about Task Force Lima at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today with Francis Rose is back in a moment.
Here's Bill Rowan from Splunk on Innovation in Government, FedRAMP, presented by Carasoft.
I get the concern, but I think that if you're going to do business in the federal government, or for that matter, the state government arena, I think it's fair to say we're going to demand very high standards. And if your intellectual property is not up to that standard, do we really want to have it in areas where we might be talking about information around the Department of Energy, information around DoD, law enforcement data? These are all very important issues.
To learn more, go to fedgovtoday.com/FedRAMP.
Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, GAIN 2023, the premier government marketing conference, is coming October 17th at the Ritz-Carlton at Tyson's Corner. Government Marketing University's GAIN conference will host the leading minds in marketing to the federal government. I will see you there to kick off the conference the morning of October 17th. You can find a link to read more about it and register on the events page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks very much for watching. See you next Sunday. Have a great week.